forensic psychiatrist, and for obvious reasons, my interests are always have to do with consciousness, mostly of all. Okay, my conference is very visual because I'm going to share some images with you. I'm going to share you some sounds. It's going to be about near-death experience, but a lot in relation to consciousness. You're going to listen maybe to some words or terms that you have never listened before, like Archacoustics, for example, the science of all sounds and its impact, for example, on consciousness. Once again, I have worked with Professor Persinger at the Laurentian University in Sudbury, Ontario, in Canada, which is like the temple of consciousness. And right now, I'm the director in Madrid of a very important institution that has to do a lot with transcranial magnetic stimulation and a lot of things to do with consciousness and near-death experience too that are involved many times. I'm the author of this book, On the Other Side of the Tunnel, A Journey from the Brink of Death to the Light Beyond. Its prologue was written by Dr. Ray Mahmoudi, a friendly prologue. Well, it's impossible to not be friendly with him because he's a great guy. So he's the one who wrote this prologue. And that book, the one before, was #1 in sales, not only here in Spain, but in many other Latin countries. It's only written right now in Spanish, but it will show up very soon in English too, in North America, for English-speaking countries. I'm also the author of The Limit, which is a quite thick book of that where I try to link neurology with obviously with near-death experiences. That doesn't mean that I just I'm involved or just with the neurology, but I think neurology and spirituality has a lot to do. By the way, I have a scientific knowledge. All my knowledge is mostly scientific, but I'm also licensed in theology at the University of Navarra, which is in Pamplona, north of Spain, where the bulls, the San Fermines, and where they run the bulls every year. Not now with the pandemic, but well, where. I'm sure you guys know where it is. Okay, so this is the usual thing we have all seen. What happens on a near-death experience, the tunnel, the out-of-body experience. Of course, there is an accident before. These sounds that come, all this feeling that you are like going up or sometimes down. It's an exception, but I think it's very important to remark this fact. Why is my second book called The Limits? Because I try to find these limits. I started looking for further evidence for veridical perception during near-death experiences. As you know, the wrist red shoes, this story that happened at the Seattle hospital, where a person that was having near-death experience could see this pair of shoes outside, of a window, made me think a lot. I studied a lot of facts that could interfere with these near-death experiences, like gasometry, like chemicals. People that don't believe in near-death experiences usually say, oh yeah, it's the gas, the CO2, it's rising and you're confused and you're having all these kind of things. We have been studying these kind of facts and we didn't find a direct relation, neither with the chemicals, neither with the anesthesiologist, for example. I also work with Professor Henrik Hertz at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. He plays a lot with virtual reality and he mimics out-of-body experiences, for example, with this kind of 3D cameras and the 3D, virtual glasses like the person in the picture is being shown. For example, in this particular experiment, what Professor Hertz is doing is touching the person with one big pen here in the chest, and at the same time, with the other hand, it's like touching the camera. Well, what that person sees, it's a pencil that's coming towards and finally has the feeling of touching the chest. Well, in the second level, you just touch the cameras, not the chest, but the person with the virtual glasses feels that it's being touched, even when it's not being touched. I think this is very important and has a lot to do, I'm going to explain a bit later, in relation to out-of-body experiences. And this gave me clues to understand the aware project of Sam Parnia at the Stony Brook Hospital. I was with him in New York too, and in Portugal, where we had a meeting, and he shared some very interesting information with me. This also made me understand the experience of Dr. Evan Alexander in relation that suffered, as you know, as many of you know, he suffered this experience some years ago. And of course, why not? Dr. Hammeroff in Arizona, with the theory of the microtubules, where the consciousness is being produced not only in the brain. And that's possibly one of the other very important clues to understand the whole thing. Well, all this made me go and change course in my mind about how to study this kind of situations, how to find a solution of how could we explain how is a near-death experience being produced. Try to understand the neurophysiological part of it, but beware, understanding the neurophysiologic effects does not mean we are running out of the spiritual area. Neurophysiology and spirituality are very tied together, most of it in the right temporal lobe, like we're going to see. Some authors, as you know, they call this right temporal lobe as the God's antenna. It's the part of our brain that knows how to connect with an upper deity, upper God. So the questions were, can science really explain these phenomena? New science, modern science, not science from 20th century, not the skeptics, but people that are as open-minded as possible. This process means understanding this spirituality, but does this mean to lose the spiritual part of it? Science is breaking, as you all know, many borderlines. Science nowadays is running into, for example, quantum mechanics and a lot of things that sounded like science fiction or like magic not many years ago. So what I decide is to work at the Laurentian University in Sudbury in Canada. There you have in the middle Professor Michael Persinger. This is Sudbury, very nice place, very beautiful, very Canadian. Like in many Canadian pictures, they are most of all taken during spring or summer. Everything looks very green and very sunny. But here's Professor Michael Persinger. He died just 2 years ago. He was like my right hand or my shaman, trying to understand what was going on. The Consciousness Research Lab at Laurentian University. Here is his office. As you can see, there are a lot of papers. And here is myself at the end of the journey, explaining some kind of stuff. And here's why probably many people in Sudbury research really a lot. This is a picture on a Friday or Saturday night. There's nothing to do, even if it's summertime. So the best thing you can do is to stay at university and research and study as much as you can. Here is a machine, repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation. It's a machine. Here you have a coil that you put in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex or in other places in the brain, so you can stimulate. You put it in the right temporal lobe, you can produce some spiritual feelings. Later, I'm going to show you a very interesting machine that is called a God's helmet or current helmet that produces this kind of feelings. This is very, very interesting. So, what I started to think, well, I started to study consciousness too in animals, in mammals, most of all, but not always mammals. In elephants, as you can see in the other picture here, you have elephants, dolphins, crows that are very, very intelligent, by the way, and specifically inherent on how, for example, a mammal recognizes himself. In this case, for example, this elephant, as you can see, has an X, a drawing at one side of his head, and he ends up recognizing himself in a mirror. Well, so my proposal is to start thinking that the brain is like a universal interface. We live inside the brain. The brain is like a screen between the real world and our inner world. And this is very important to understand what happens during near-death experiences. Another piece in this jigsaw are Archacoustics. Archacoustics is a science that studies sounds in temples, churches, mosques, and it has, of course, physical properties and consistency that are common to holy sites. I'm going to explain this very soon. One of the studies we did that is already published in a scientific magazine is that we went to a cave in the north of Spain in a place called Puente Viesco, El Castillo. You can see here Madrid, Lisboa is right here. This is right in the north, close to Santander, Bilbao, and so. Here's a closer picture of the mountain where these caves are. And then we discovered something very, very interesting, and it's a golden ratio. Why these people, many thousands of years ago, they choose this mountain instead of, for example, the one here on the right? There are more on the left, there are more on the right. Why? Well, very possible we discovered that this mountain has a golden ratio. You know, the golden ratio, it's a ratio, obviously, that defines beauty. You can find it in many places, in chairs, in some snail shells, for example, in the Mona Lisa, and so on. So we are very active. We decide to go to the cave. This cave is not open to the general public, and we wanted to see what the hell is going in there. Well, that's myself. I'm going to go a bit faster. Yeah, people were living here 40,800 years ago, and you could see in the walls many paintings. For example, these are fingerprints. Many people think, by the way, it's that this is paint with blood. It's not blood, it's iron oxide that is found in the outside of the caves, and then people prepare some kind of paint, produce it, mix with water, and sometimes with grease, with the fat of animals. So many thousands of years afterwards, you can see all these fingerprints. You can see an animal there on your right upper side, but you can see too, for example, it's very interesting, you know, how human beings, we all wanted to leave our print behind our lives. No, 40,000 years ago, they wanted to put the two fingers on the walls. Look, these hands, beautiful too. They spray the paint, probably with a straw, all over the hand, just leaving all the profile. For example, some bisons. Yeah, the head of deer. For example, here you can see the horns too. Very beautiful. By the way, look how clever they were, that they even they took the chance of this imperfection in the stone to mimic the eye, and then around they draw the deer. Here more drawings and more drawings. And then we discovered something very interesting. This was a big hall in the middle of the cave. There was like amphitheater, very big place, and had in the middle has this stalagmite on the floor in this big chamber. And then we discovered, look what happened when you light it with a lamp. It projected a very interesting shadow. And why did we did it? Because there was still on the floor rests of this fat that was burned thousands of years ago. It was black, and pieces of objects, of clay, of ceramics, that where people were doing probably the same as we did. Listen, there we are projecting light on this stalagmite, and look the effect. Very, very interesting. We also found rest of some archaic music instruments, and we this was in another visit a few months before, and what we did was to reproduce one of these instruments to see how it could sound in these people that were looking for spirituality. Listen, it's very interesting. So this probably happened 40,000 years ago. It's very interesting. The whole atmosphere was very magic when you were going out of the cave. By the way, getting into that place, it took about 3 hours. Going down was very, very dangerous. Going with ladders, descending with ropes, and so on. So we also brought some equipment, and this is very interesting information for you people. We put a sound system at one side of the cave, like here on the left, and we put a directional microphone at the other side of the cave, and we started broadcasting sound frequencies, 16 hertz, 20 hertz, 25 hertz, 30, like pitch was rising, and the microphone was picking up the sounds. What did we wanted to know? We wanted to know what was the most powerful frequency in those caves. What was the frequency that had this strong reverberation in the walls? What kind of sounds are the most important for spirituality? This is somehow what we did. At the other side, as I told you, there was this directional microphone, and there was a computer connected to computer. Here on the right side, you have an infrasound sensor for frequencies lower than 20 hertz. And what we discovered was something very, very interesting. The best frequency that could be picked was the 110 hertz. And listen, this for many of you doesn't mean anything, but you'll find something very interesting in your daily life right now. This 110 hertz increases the activity in the prefrontal cortex. It deactivates the language center. This is very interesting. Changes activity from left to the right hemisphere. What does that mean? that produces emotions and feelings. It increases empathy. It makes a lot of thinking, lowers thinking in relation to feelings. And this 110 hertz, we put in the computer, and we discover that it produces a displacement of every particle in a radius of 49 and 63 centimeters. What does that mean? Listen, well, we already printed this in a scientific magazine. Here's my name as a main investigator. And what do we discover? Look, here's a skull of a modern Homo sapiens on the right side, and here's an archaic Homo sapiens. What we discover is that 110 hertz, very close to our skull, by the way, moves the particles around our skull and our brain, stimulating it. Not 100 hertz, not 120 hertz, but exactly 110 hertz. So after doing this discovery, we start studying some stimulations. For example, Ellen White, for example, from the Adventists of Seventh Day. Maybe if I have time, I'll explain something about it. But mostly of all, altered states of consciousness. With this information, we went to the convent of Santo Domingo in Lisboa in Portugal, and we start discovering exactly the same thing. In the first file where you're sitting in a church, and this we check it in many other churches and mosques. As you can see here, 110 hertz is the most powerful frequency. If you sit in the first seats in many churches, you're going to start feeling like elevated into God. Is this a spiritual state of the art? Is God made it? Is something only neurophysiological? Maybe you can have the answer if you investigate more.